June the 6th, 1944. Normandy coast, 05.45 hours. General Erwin Rommel's aide, Captain Helmuth Lang, stood on a bluff near Caen, binoculars pressed to his face. He had expected a raid, perhaps a few divisions at most, something that could be contained with counterattacks. Instead, the horizon had vanished beneath a gray mist of steel. Ships stretched as far as the eye could see. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, landing craft by the hundreds. The sea itself seemed paved with vessels. Lang lowered his glasses, pale. "Herr General," he whispered, "this is not an invasion. It is a continent moving across the water." In that moment, Rommel and his staff realized something that would haunt the German command for the rest of the war. America's true weapon was not tanks or planes, but logistics on a scale beyond comprehension. For years, Nazi propaganda had painted the United States as soft, decadent, incapable of fighting a long war. German generals believed that if America ever landed in France, it would be small, limited, and easily pushed back. But Operation Overlord shattered those illusions. In the first 24 hours alone, the Allies landed over 156,000 men, 20,000 vehicles, and 4,000 tons of supplies. Within 2 weeks, that number swelled to 500,000 men, 77,000 vehicles, and more than 100,000 tons of supplies. German commanders, used to scraping for fuel and ammunition, were stunned. They had never imagined an enemy could build a port out of nothing, ship entire armies across an ocean, and feed them as if they were at home. The secret lay in planning and industry. Months before D-Day, American engineers designed the Mulberry harbors, giant artificial ports assembled from massive concrete caissons called Phoenix units, floating roadways known as whales, and breakwaters created from sunken block ships. On June the 9th, 3 days after the landings, Mulberry A at Omaha Beach was already receiving supplies. Mulberry B at Arromanches became fully operational, handling 7,000 tons per day, the equivalent of a major European port. German intelligence had never considered such a possibility. To them, ports were fixed and fortified. The idea that the Americans could bring their own stunned them. One lesser-known fact: each Mulberry harbor required 600,000 tons of concrete, 31 miles of floating roadway, and more steel than the Eiffel Tower. Entire British and American factories had been diverted to the project, their output hidden from German spies. Hitler's intelligence chief, Admiral Canaris, later admitted that not a single accurate report about Mulberry construction reached Berlin. When German officers toured the wreckage of Mulberry A after a storm destroyed it, they shook their heads in disbelief. "Even our engineers could not have dreamed this," one remarked. But harbors were only the beginning. Behind the beaches, American engineers built a supply system that dwarfed anything the Germans had ever attempted. The Red Ball Express, launched in August 1944, became a rolling artery of fuel, ammunition, and rations. At its peak, 6,000 trucks roared day and night from the Normandy depots to the front lines. 75% of them driven by African-American soldiers serving in segregated units. Each truck carried 212 tons of supplies, and convoys often stretched 60 miles. In just 3 months, the Red Ball delivered 412,000 tons of materiel. German generals, who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their logistics, were stunned to learn the Americans had built a highway system of moving trucks that never stopped. The mathematics were merciless. A single U.S. infantry division required 700 tons of supplies per day. By late June, the Allies had landed 10 divisions. By August, more than 40. That meant 28,000 tons of supplies daily, equivalent to the weight of the entire German 7th Army. Yet somehow, the Americans kept it flowing. Food, bullets, fuel, even ice cream. German soldiers, half-starved and low on ammunition, watched with bitterness as captured American prisoners boasted of eating fresh meat and drinking Coca-Cola in the field. Fuel was the true shock. In mechanized war, fuel meant movement, and movement meant victory. German tanks often sat idle for lack of gasoline. At Normandy, American engineers solved the problem with PLUTO, pipeline under the ocean. Beginning in August 1944, they laid flexible pipelines under the English Channel, pumping millions of gallons of fuel directly to depots in France. By war's end, PLUTO had delivered over 172 million gallons. German commanders, who relied on vulnerable rail lines constantly bombed by Allied aircraft, could not comprehend such abundance. "They fight with rivers of fuel," one officer lamented, "while we fight with drops." Another little-known fact: American supply dumps in Normandy were so vast that reconnaissance pilots mistook them for cities. The St. Lo depot, nicknamed the City of Canvas, covered 25 square miles with tents, barrels, crates, and fuel drums stacked higher than houses. German intelligence, when shown aerial photos after the war, refused at first to believe they were supply depots. They looked like entire towns. On the ground, the shock was personal. German soldiers who captured American rations were amazed to find not only canned meat and coffee, but also chocolate, cigarettes, and chewing gum. A single U.S. K ration contained more calories than some German soldiers received in 2 days. Prisoners later testified that their first doubt about victory came not from defeat in battle, but from tasting American food. "If they can feed every man like this," one POW said, "then we cannot win." The contrast was stark during the battle for Caen. German defenders rationed their artillery shells, sometimes firing only 2 rounds per day. American batteries fired thousands. At one point, a single U.S. division expended more shells in 24 hours than the entire German 7th Army had available for a week. Logistics was not glamorous, but it was decisive. Every German general who studied the campaign afterward admitted it. They had been defeated as much by trucks, ships, and pipelines as by tanks and planes. There was also the speed. By the end of June, the Allies had landed 850,000 men and 148,000 vehicles. By July, they averaged 1 new division landed every 5 days. German commanders, still waiting for reinforcements delayed by Allied air attacks on French railways, were horrified. They could not replace losses, while the Americans seemed to conjure fresh armies from the sea. General von Rundstedt, when asked what Germany could do to stop the invasion, replied bitterly, "Make peace. We cannot fight machinery." One of the most astonishing feats came after the breakout from Normandy. As Patton's Third Army surged east, outrunning its supplies, American logisticians improvised air supply drops, rebuilt railways, and expanded the Red Ball Express. At its peak, Patton's men consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel per day. German officers captured near Metz were interrogated about their supply situation. They admitted their entire corps received less fuel in a week than Patton consumed in a single day. Even weather, which the Germans counted on, betrayed them. A massive storm in June destroyed Mulberry A, the American harbor at Omaha Beach. The Germans celebrated, believing it would cripple supply. Instead, within days, the U.S. shifted everything to Mulberry B and directly across beaches. Engineers unloaded 6,000 tons per day across sand, using landing craft, amphibious trucks called DUKWs, and floating causeways. To German astonishment, the American supply rate hardly dropped. For them, a storm that would have paralyzed operations barely caused inconvenience. Psychologically, the effect on German troops was devastating. Officers who toured, captured supply dumps, returned shaken. General Bayerlein of Panzer Lehr reported after the war, "We could not imagine such wealth. We lived with shortages every day, shortages of fuel, of ammunition, of spare parts. The Americans had everything, in piles beyond counting. It was not a matter of fighting men, it was a matter of fighting factories." By August 1944, the truth was undeniable. Germany still fielded skilled soldiers, deadly tanks, and veteran officers, but they were trapped in a war where the enemy never ran out. Ammunition, food, fuel, medicine, all arrived in endless streams. To German commanders, it was like watching a tide rise higher and higher, drowning every effort. As Rommel himself admitted shortly before his forced suicide, "The Americans fight with mathematics. For every shell we fire, they fire 10. For every tank we destroy, 10 more arrive. For every soldier killed, 2 more land. We cannot match it. It is hopeless." In hindsight, the shock of D-Day logistics lay not just in the invasion itself, but in its sustainment. Any nation could land troops once. Only America, with its industrial might, could land them day after day, month after month, until France was liberated and Germany itself invaded. The Germans had expected a battle. What they faced was a machine. On that morning in June 1944, Captain Lang had been right. It was not just an invasion. It was a continent moving across the sea, a continent of ships, trucks, pipelines, and factories. And once it arrived, nothing could stop it.